About a year ago, I did this book club for Fahrenheit 451, which is a book I had read like back in high school or maybe even college. I don't really remember. It wasn't like a signed reading. I just was a very big bookworm in school. And so I was reading all the time. And I read the book and I didn't really like it back then. I was like, like whatever. It didn't feel like it had any relevance to me at that time. And this was like back in the, late 90s, early 2000s, somewhere around that time period. Well, about a year ago, I did this book club where we read it again. And I got to tell you guys, reading Fahrenheit 451 today is a completely different experience than reading it 20 years ago. Let me tell you what, it has complete relevance to what is going on right now, especially from the point of view that this is a self-inflicted thing that we're doing to ourselves. This is not, we can talk about the establishment all we want, and God knows that I do, but this is something that we are inflicting primarily on ourselves and is completely unnecessary. So anyway, back when I did that book club about a year ago, what happened is people started talking about how they were going to start collecting physical books. And I thought that that was a little bit blown out of proportion at the time. I don't think that anymore. In fact, just several weeks ago in my locals community, we actually had a conversation, and I have to give full credit where credit is due. It was spurred by Deb Fillman, who runs the Reason We Learn YouTube channel, which I strongly recommend that you all go to subscribe to, because when it comes to things like education, homeschooling, how you get your kids out of these systems, why we do the things we do when we're teaching people things. She is the absolute best. She is a queen. She is criminally undersubbed at the moment. I don't think she's been doing it for very long, but please go and subscribe to her channel because she's awesome. And she encouraged many of us on one of my local Zoom calls a couple weeks ago to actually buy physical books. And one that many of us bought, and I bought it because I was actually interested in reading it, is this is actually an old school textbook that used to be taught in school. What you should know about communism and why. Because there used to be a time in school when they taught that communism was bad. Who would have thunk it? So I'm actually one of those people now that I'm actually going to be collecting older copies of books to make sure that there's at least copies of them, because I actually don't think that this idea is crazy anymore. And you want to know why? Because of articles like this. This is from the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. The woke left wants to erase classic literature for kids. Narrow minds are deciding what books children will read. So we're going to read this article and we're going to have a little conversation about it. But before we get into that, listen, guys, I do almost daily content. Every once in a while, I take a little vacation day, usually on the weekends, but I do try to do daily content throughout the week about news, politics, culture, a lot of this SJW stuff, a lot of the woke stuff. I'm building a whole website to talk about the woke stuff and what we can do about it at the moment, something I'm really, really excited about. But if you want to keep in touch, you want more information about that, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving it a thumbs up, turning on notifications, all that good stuff. The other thing I would ask is please consider joining my locals community. There are a couple benefits to joining locals. One, you get all of my videos ad-free. And that's completely free in locals. You don't have to pay anything for it. I know on YouTube, you have to pay a little subscription fee to get stuff ad-free. On locals, you don't need to pay anything. I post every single video that I do here on my locals completely ad-free. So that's one benefit to doing it. But the other benefit is if you do become a supporter, which is like $5 a month, you do get access to weekly Zoom, twice a week Zoom calls that I do with my community where we get together, we talk about what's going on. It's like a little support group. It's so, so nice. But it also gets you in a place where I know I can actually say what I want in my locals. On YouTube, I have to censor myself all the flipping time. I know exactly what's going to get me demonetized most of the time. Sometimes they just do it arbitrarily, but so I can say whatever the flip I want on locals. Okay, so that's a place where you're going to hear me much more uncensored because I trust that I'm not going to be censored or banned or demonetized or any of these things. So I strongly recommend come in my locals. It is a really supportive, amazing community. It's like social media for adults. There are no trolls. It's so, so nice. And the information is right below me, kb.locals.com. All right, let's take a look at this opinion piece. When I was a boy about 11, I committed a crime that changed my life. I stole a book. I found it in another kid's desk and began reading, hiding it behind some boring textbook and couldn't give it up. That actually happened to me quite a bit in school too. I actually would have teachers take away books that I was reading in their classes because I found their classes so boring that I would read other books that had nothing to do with the classes, and they would always punish me for it. And like, I actually got detention one time for, I kid you not, reading a book in class. Whatever. I didn't even try in school, and I graduated like third in my class or something like that. Imagine if I had tried, I would have blown them all out of the water. It's still with me. I'll never give it up. The book opened up the world to me. What was it? Odysseus the Wanderer, written for children by the classicist Aubrey de Sillincourt. It is a version of the Odyssey of Homer, the greatest adventure story ever told. I've since read several translations of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. The crafty Odysseus, the man of wrath, was a trickster. He duped the Trojans with his Trojan horse, befuddled the man-eating Cyclops, and withstood the deadly song of sirens. Though he was pre-Christian, I considered the wanderer, king of Ithaca, as a patron saint. There was no trap he couldn't escape with his wits. His story has shaped Western literature, as well as Star Trek, for some 3,000 years. But there is one thing Odysseus may not be able to withstand: the woke culture. The political left and the growing disrupt text movements, fueled by critical race theory, in American public schools wants him gone. Classic Western literature from Homer to Shakespeare, Mark Twain, and even Harper Lee is now being canceled, much in the same way that the Islamic State and early Christians destroyed ancient statues that offended them. There is something barbarous about it all. Just a few days ago, zealots in San Francisco began stripping offensive names from public schools. Names such as George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and even Democratic U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is a living witness to her own cancellation. The stripping of names are public events. They pit aging, worried traditional liberals against a radical leftist movement that will devour them as surely as the relentless Bolsheviks devoured the more moderate Mensheviks. But the purging of great literature often takes place quietly among woke teachers and librarians. If the classics aren't exactly banned outright or burned, they have another way: to place offending literature on the back shelf out of the reach of the young, where they've lost to gather dust. So this is particularly insidious. So he said a couple interesting things right here. The first thing he said is that he thinks that traditional liberals are going to be pitted against this radical leftist movement. I don't think a lot of traditional liberals have really woken up to what this movement is yet. And I consider myself still a liberal. I'm absolutely still a liberal. I've never stopped being a liberal. I know that you guys think I've moved to the right and I've become conservative when I never really did, but I absolutely still do believe in that. I just think a lot of people like me haven't woken up. Where they're at right now is they see people like me who agree with them almost all entirely, maybe not entirely, but agree with them a good bit on policy. They look at me and say, you're a right-wing fascist. That's where they're at right now. That is not just going on the far left. That is going on in the more moderates because they're only listening to CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post. I don't think they've really woken up yet to what's happening. So I don't agree that this is pitting aging, worried traditional liberals against the radical leftist movement because they don't know who their enemy is. They think that their enemy is on the right when in fact their enemy is on the left. But what he's also talking about here is actually much more insidious, which is just librarians and teachers not choosing to teach this stuff anymore. They're just putting it on the shelf. They're just not teaching it anymore. And that is actually scarier than the outright war that many of them think is coming. Let's keep going. Author Padma, I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing that last name, wrote an essay weeding out racism's invisible roots, rethinking children's classics in the School Library Journal. She supports this purge, so I didn't really want to read her name anyway. Challenging old classics is the literary equivalent of replacing statues of racist figures, she writes, exposing young people to stories in which racism, sexism, ableism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate are the norm may sow seeds of bias that can grow into indifference or prejudice. And so the astounding complexity of great literature and great writers is now reduced, as so many things are these days, to angry zealotry and political correctness. What people who do not understand the woke don't get is that this is not just about actual racism and actual white supremacy. This is about erasing everyone that doesn't agree with them. Everyone who wants to be able to read these classic books. Everyone who won't use the words they want them to use, who won't bend the knee to all of the different insane ideas that these people have. This is going to impact everyone. And if it hasn't impacted you yet, you're very, very lucky. But don't think that you can sit back and escape it just because you don't say anything, just because you don't speak out, because it is absolutely going to come for you at some point. Shakespeare's glaring sin is his anti-Semitic treatment of Jews in The Merchant of Venice. But isn't there value in his works? Do I really have to ask that? Harper Lee's sin is creating hero Atticus Finch, the white liberal would-be savior of a black man wrongly accused. I'm sorry, did I miss the part where To Kill a Mockingbird got canceled? Because apparently that's happened. I mean, there's a play on Broadway like a year ago that got this rousing critical acclaim, but we're not allowed to like it today. And this is what I mean when I say this is going to impact everyone. Literally, if you now like To Kill a Mockingbird, if you think that that is a classic book that everyone should be reading in school, which is I absolutely do think that, you are hereby canceled. And what is the blind poet Homer's outrage? He didn't think of himself as belonging to the West the way we think of the West. But when Odysseus enters the underworld and meets the vain and deadly killer Achilles, Odysseus is told this: I would rather be a slave of landless barbarian than king of all the dead. A Disrupts Text leader, Lorena German, author of The Anti-Racist Teacher, explains the sweeping purge this way. So, let's be honest, the conversation really isn't about universality. This is about an ingrained and internalized elevation of Shakespeare in a way that excludes other voices. This is about white supremacy and colonization. If you read Shakespeare or teach it in your classroom, you are supporting white supremacy and colonization. This is what they want you to think. If this new test is for all literature, movies, statues, anything of historic value, is 100% purity, all will fail. And who would grade the test? When I was young, there were no books they couldn't be read. To deny classic literature was to brand yourself a barbarian. But now, these narrow minds deciding what books children will read are the dictators of the new tolerant culture. There is nothing delicious in the irony. There is great value in diverse characters the young can identify with. I'm not arguing with that. Homer understood the multicultural world. But kids aren't stupid. They're not easily fed farm animals, despite what new Napoleons believe. If children associate literature with political indoctrination, whether from the right or the left, the smart ones will put up a wall and shut down, and they won't develop the necessary skill of logic and critical thinking needed to grasp and wrestle with the great conflicting ideas offered in classic Western literature. Perhaps that's the real plan. Who needs to develop critical thinking when you have an ideological catchism to politically shape the minds of the young? Politics is always downstream of culture, and I'm just glad I stole that book when I could. Yeah, I mean, chilling point at the end right there. The entire goal, guys, is to teach these kids what to think, not how to think. They haven't been teaching kids in school how to think for years. So they are completely fine with developing kids, young adults, without the ability to think critically. After all, if they think critically, they're going to question what they're doing. And that is the number one sin in the world of the woke. If you question what they're doing, you are inherently the enemy and you will be branded as an alt-right, extreme, white supremacist Nazi, just like all the rest of us. Congratulations. I keep being told that there's cookies on this side. I've yet to receive cookies, but you know, I'll take thinking any day of the week to mindlessly following all the sheep right off the dang cliff. Guys, that's all I've got for right now. I'll see you soon.